Good morning. Buongiorno. My name is Dr. Rebecca Bowling, and I'm the director of the David M. Rubenstein National Institute for Holocaust Documentation at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I am very pleased to be moderating this very interesting morning session on the roles of papal diplomats. We have 4 speakers, and we have another cold day in Rome, so we'll try to heat it up just a little. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the presentations and to our question and answer period. So our first speaker today, with no further ado, let me get my glasses on, is Dr. Johan Popa, who is a Gerda Henkel Stiftung Scholar and an honorary research fellow at the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Manchester. He is the author of the Romanian Orthodox Church and the Holocaust, which came out with Indiana University Press in 2017, and was the co-winner of the 2018 Yad Vashem International Book Prize for Holocaust Research. His second book, tentatively titled A Few Good Men, the Vatican, the Catholic Church in Romania, and the Holocaust, is in the process of being published. Johan Popa is a specialist on modern European history with a focus on the Holocaust, religion and politics, and Jewish-Christian relations. He will be speaking today on Shades and Shadows, Vatican Diplomacy, and the Holocaust in Romania.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. During the Holocaust, the Vatican's ambassador to Romania was Monsignor Andrea Casullo. And although I didn't write this on the PowerPoint, I just want to emphasize that Romania was, before the Second World War, the country with the third largest Jewish community in Europe, approximately 800,000 Jews. He was a first diplomat who served before moving to Bucharest as Papal Nuncio to Canada and Egypt. His rescue efforts have been known since the 1960s, when La Civiltà Cattolica published documents on his activity, most of them later included in the ADSS. They were used by Theodor Lavie, an Israeli historian of Romanian origin, in his 1963 article, The Vatican's Endeavors on Behalf of Romanian Jewry During the Second World War. Lavie's article set up inadvertently a trend in historiographical writing. Emphasis on Monsignor Casullo's interventions in favor of Jews and almost complete lack of knowledge about the actions of other Catholic clergy or about the gray areas of the nuncio's behavior. There were several important aspects known before the opening of the Pius XII collections, such as the fact that Monsignor Casullo intervened to state officials for pupils of Jewish origin who could not attend Catholic schools after August 1940, that he opposed the March 1941 ban of Jews' conversions to Christianity, that he forwarded pleas of converted and non-converted Jews to Romanian authorities, that he informed the Vatican about the situation of Romanian Jews, that he visited in April 1943 Transnistria, the territory where hundreds of thousands of Jews had been killed. Finally, it was known that he played a role in repatriations from Transnistria and immigration to Palestine. My research in the Pius XI collections, ADSS, and in various archives in Romania, Israel, or the United States brought to light more such examples, but also nuanced others. In 1939, the Papal Nuncio and the Vatican played an essential role in helping Polish and other Central European refugees who fled German invasion and found temporary shelter in Romania. The opposition of Monsignor Casullo and Catholics in Romania, including Archbishop Alexandru Cisar, head of Roman Catholics in the country, to the ban of Jews' conversion was much stronger than initially evidenced. The nuncio already informed the Vatican at the end of 1941 about deportations and murders in Transnistria. He and the Holy See played a middleman role between Romania and the Allies after October 1942, but the extent was still not clear. Andrea Casulo's 1943 visit to Transnistria was shadowed by the report sent to the Vatican, where he downplayed the suffering of Jews. Letters sent to the Holy See in 1940-1942 showed his anti-Semitism. The Pius XII collection strengthened most of these arguments. For instance, the newly released documents show that after 22nd of June 1941, the Vatican started an ample effort of gathering evidence about and disseminating aid for prisoners of war. On 18 August 1941, Cardinal Luigi Maglione wrote to Monsignor Casulo informing him about the Holy See's Information Service for Victims of War and asking, quote, whether it would be possible to organize the search for prisoners and what assistance could be rendered to them. Above all, seek to know the dispositions of this government in this regard and whether visits to concentration camps will possibly be welcomed and useful. The Holy See insisted in autumn 1941 that the Papal Nuncio or other Catholic officials in Romania arrange visits to prisoners of war. As Cardinal Maglione explained, such initiative, quote, would make them aware of the interest the Holy Father takes in their fate, offering to provide them with those services that are within the capability of the Holy See, such as, for example, sending news to families and also providing distribution of holy objects, especially if requested, end of quote. In one telegram, the Vatican Secretary of State also requested, quote, please quickly send a brief report on the assistance given to prisoners and interns with, if possible, publishable photographs. A first visit was arranged at the beginning of December 1941 in Vlădeni Camp, Brașov County. The report does not specify what Catholic official or institution coordinated the trip, but mentions that the camp had 1,400 prisoners, including Ukrainian, Russians, Turks, Uzbeks, Jews, and Poles. The template questionnaire meant to be filled in included issues such as religious assistance, health, hygiene, cleanliness, the behavior of local population, access to post office and correspondence, access to paid work. In total, there were 65 questions. Documents in the Pius XII collections also show that before his 1943 visit to Transnistria, Monsignor Casulo made another visit to Russian prisoners of war in June 1942. In comparison to the trip to Transnistria, which was mainly aimed at Jewish inmates, these, as the visit of December 1941, were focused mostly on non-Jewish refugees and prisoners. The Papal Nuncio made a third visit to camps with American and Russian prisoners in October-November 1943. The Pius XII collections also bring new insight into the position of the Holy Office regarding conversion of Jews during the Second World War. The ADSS already included the May 1941 letter of the Holy Office, which was triggered by an inquiry on this topic by Monsignor Casulo. It was largely unsympathetic to Jews' suffering and showed a great deal of prejudice by insisting in several paragraphs, almost 2 pages, on checking the sincerity of aspiring Jewish converts. A second ruling was issued in April 1942, again in response to the situation in Romania. The letter of Cardinal Marchetti Selvegiani came in a context in which the state was intimidating Catholics in Romania for full compliance with the ban of conversions. The Holy Office largely upheld the May 1941 decision, which emphasized a need for thorough preparedness before admitting someone for baptism. However, here the letter was not that insistent on examination of Jews' sincerity. The concession made in 1941 regarding the period of catechization was also maintained, leaving the length of the catechization period according to the understanding and spiritual conditions of the individual catechumens. Moreover, the Holy Office went a step further with its adjustments. Some aspiring converts were fearing at the time that they might be deported or affected by anti-Semitic legislation during their catechization before being baptized. In the first part, the letter suggested a middle ground, asking the Papal Nuncio to inquire, quote, whether it is possible to obtain from this government, for those who are regularly enrolled in the catechumenate, the same facilities and the same advantages granted to the baptized. thus leaving the possibility of completing the education without fear of serious material damage, end of quote. In case the catechization could not be completed, quote, due to grave inconveniences, end of quote, priests could, according to their conscience, quote again, admit to baptism only those who they know individually and are well instructed, at least in the truths of the faith necessary for Christian life, and are sincerely prepared to lead a life according to the precepts of the Catholic faith, end of quote. In such situations, the baptized will complete the catechetical training afterwards so that they can then be admitted to Holy Eucharistic Communion. The Pius XII collections also show more examples of Monsignor Casulo's anti-Semitism. They suggest that, at least before 1943, he internalized many of the Romanian nationalists' arguments. For instance, on 24 December 1937, just after the general elections and less than a week before the nomination of the heavily anti-Semitic National Christian Party cabinet, led by Octavian Goga, Monsignor Casulo wrote a long letter to Cardinal Pacelli containing several references to Jews. The Papal Nuncio explained that, quote, the Jews came especially after the Great War from Poland and other parts of Europe and settled in great number in Maramureș and other parts of the country. Most of these people did not in fact come to Romania, but they just found themselves there due to the changing of borders and territorial gains after the First World War. He argued that Jews destabilized confessional life in many villages and that they prefer cities and commerce, shying away from working the land. He also pointed out that there were cities where certain professions had been taken over by Jews. This type of language and arguments, which distorted historical facts to create the impression of a Jewish invasion, were used by many politicians of that era and by the Romanian Orthodox Patriarch Miron Cristea. Monsignor Casulo directly mentioned Cristea and Nicolae Iorga, a prestigious figure, former prime minister, to justify and legitimate possible reprisals against Jews. In his view, it was not only the extremists, but also more respected ecclesiastical and political figures, such as Cristea and Iorga, who, quote, wrote vehement articles to stop the Jewish influence, end of quote, and proposed similar anti-Semitic measures. The 1937-1938 correspondence between the Papal Nuncio and Cardinal Pacelli includes newspapers clippings about the nomination of the Goga government and its political program, as well as notes about Monsignor Casulo's numerous meetings with various new ministers. They make evident that he liked the National Christian Party cabinet as it resonated with the Holy See's focus on rechristianization of society. His view was shared by Cardinal Pacelli in a letter sent on 20 January 1938. The Vatican Secretary of State said, and I quote, "In fact, the Holy See follows with keen attention everything that concerns the life of Romania and is eager to maintain with the current government the friendly relations already enjoyed with the governments that have preceded it," end of quote. The context of Cardinal Pacelli's letter is important. It was sent after the heavy nationalistic nature of the Goga cabinet, which put the Romania for Romanians slogan at its core, was made clear. It was also after several anti-Semitic laws, including ban of several Jewish newspapers, the firing of many Jews on public payroll, or the withdrawal of state funding for Jewish institutions were passed. It was also just 2 days before the most damaging law, requesting the revision of citizenship for all Jews in Romania, was to be adopted. Over the next 2 years, 225,000 Jews would lose their Romanian citizenship because of this regulation. Both Cardinal Pacelli and Papal Nuncio Casulo were likely aware that this law might be passed. On 22nd January 1938, France and UK openly asked for the removal of the Goga government. The cabinet was dismissed on 10th February 1938 and threatened with recalling their ambassadors in protest to anti-Semitic legislation. The Vatican Secretary of State and Monsignor Casulo did not share these worries and did not voice any protest. Another controversial aspect related to Vatican diplomacy and the Holocaust in Romania is linked to the role played by the Holy See in Romania's wartime foreign policy. The Holy See understood, especially after the signing of the Concordat in 1929, that Romanian politicians, most of them Christian Orthodox, saw the Vatican as an important player in international politics. That impression was cemented even more, both in Romania and at the Vatican, after events in autumn 1940, when Ion Antonescu, the leader of Romania, met Pope Pius XII, and the Holy See manifested a balanced approach to territorial changes in northern Transylvania, condemning Hungarian abuses against ethnic Romanian population. This made the Romanian leader cautious in his relation with the Catholic Church, as he believed that the Vatican might be helpful in post-war peace and territorial negotiations. Even more, with the Battle of Stalingrad stalling, Ion Antonescu realized in autumn 1942, probably for the first time, that Germany might not win the war. This is in the context in which he started opening to the idea of a change in wartime foreign policy, and the Holy See began to play, as Leah Benjamin rightly puts it, the middleman role between Romania and the Allies. According to a 15 October 1942 cable of the Romanian Special Intelligence Service, the Swiss embassy in Romania announced that, and quote, when he returns to Bucharest, the Papal Nuncio will bring on behalf of the United States government, via the Vatican, several important news related to international affairs. It is claimed that Romania would be guaranteed a highly respectable and honorable place at decisions of the future peace conference. As a result of these promises, some attitudes of Romanian authorities in Bucharest might change. End of quote. The note was forwarded to the Romanian government, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of the Interior, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a sign of its importance. By the middle of October 1942, Ion Antonescu changed his mind. He initially postponed deportations to Belzec of approximately 290,000 Jews that were still in Romania at the time. Later, after the loss of the Battle of Stalingrad, these deportations were entirely cancelled. The Holy See was not the sole player in this change, as there were many other contributing factors and institutions and personalities to this decision. However, the role of the Vatican, not only in the October 1942 events, but even more importantly, in Romania's later efforts to cleanse its image, should not be underestimated. Later events, such as the trip of the Papal Nuncio to Transnistria in April-May 1943, and his involvement in the repatriation of Jewish deportees from that territory, should be seen in this context of diplomatic mutual interests. Romania wanted to shift attention from previous murders, while the Vatican wanted to be seen as caring for victims of war. In these diplomatic efforts, however, the memory of Jewish suffering and of Romania's role in the murder of hundreds of thousands of people was to be cleansed. Some historians speak of the Holy See's wartime catacomb diplomacy. But in Romania, there was no need for catacomb diplomacy. After October 1942, it was a diplomacy made in the open. The 1943 visit of the Papal Nuncio Casullo to Transnistria was arranged in collaboration by the Romanian authorities and the Holy See. And in July 1943, Mihai Antonescu, the vice president of the Romanian cabinet, made an official visit to the Vatican. The report of Monsignor Casullo after his April 1943 visit to Jewish inmates in Transnistria was included in ADSS Volume 9. The document deliberately hides the murders that took place in that territory and paints a rosy image about the conditions in which Jews were kept in concentration camps. I examine in my upcoming book several explanations for the Papal Nuncio's decision to conceal the crimes. Amongst them, the fact that, at the time when the Holy See was helping Romania get closer to the Allies, a bad report would have compromised those aims. However, even more problematic, to me, is the audience of Mihai Antonescu, vice president of the Romanian government, with both Pope Pius XII and Cardinal Maglione on 2nd of July 1943. Mihai Antonescu is one of the main political actors responsible for the murder of up to 380,000 Jews during the Holocaust in Romania. He famously said on 8 July 1941, in the context of the Cleansing the Land campaign against the Jewish population, quote, "I don't know how many centuries will pass before the Romanian people meet again with such total freedom of action. such opportunity for ethnic cleansing and national revision. This is a time when we are masters of our land. Let us use it. If necessary, shoot your machine guns. I couldn't care less if history will recall us as barbarians." End of quote. After the July audience with the Pope, the Holy See awarded Mihai Antonescu the Grand Cross of Pius IX Order, also referred as the Pian Order, one of the most important honors conferred by the Vatican. Antonescu was informed about the award soon after the visit, but the logistics of handing the medal in were only finalized at the beginning of August 1943, when Monsignor Giovanni Montini wrote to the Papal Nuncio in Bucharest, quote, "I have the pleasure of handing over to Your Excellency the Apostolic Brief with which the Holy Father conferred the Grand Cross of the Pian Order on His Excellency Mihai Antonescu on the occasion of his visit to him recently." End of quote. This clarifies that the medal diploma was given upon instructions by, or at least with the knowledge of, Pope Pius XII. As a short conclusion, I would say that these diplomatic actions helped in the long run Romania's changing position on Jews and contributed to the survival of approximately half of its Jewish community. However, at the same time, they also helped Romania's wartime authorities to whitewash their murders and involvement in previous killings. In addition, the Pius XII collections provide new evidence on a series of important aspects such as Vatican aid during the war, Holy Office position on conversion of Jews, Holy See responses to pleas of converted Jews. They also broaden understanding on Pope Pius XII's attitude, showing his readiness to compromise on important ethical issues, such as collaboration with heavily anti-Semitic governments or audience with known anti-Semitic war criminals for the sake of an alleged greater good. Thank you.
Our second speaker today is Michele Sarfatti, who will be speaking about incoming information to the Vatican about the Shoah. Dr. Sarfatti is director of Contemporary Jewish Documentation Center in Milan, and his main work, which has been translated into English and German, is of course about Italian fascism and the identity and persecution of Jews. In 2022, he published the essay, "The Fascist Government, the Holy See, and the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages, 1935 to 1938, in the open access journal Quest, Issues in Contemporary Jewish History." More recently, in September 2023, he published an essay, roughly translated, "Italy, Autumn 1943, The Shift in Management of Rescue for Victims of the Holocaust, from Jewish to Catholic Officers." And this has appeared in the Italian journal Quaderni di Storia.
Bravissimo, Quaderni di Storia. Thank you. Buongiorno, grazie. Permettetemi di salutare due sole persone, fra le tante, Yael Orvieto e Elliot Needham, che non sono potuti venire qui con noi a causa delle barbariche azioni di Hamas in Israele. E Yael aveva lavorato molto a questo convegno, ci sta sentendo via streaming e quindi la saluto, credo proprio a nome di tutti noi. Questa relazione concerne le notizie sulla Shoah pervenute in Vaticano nel 1942. Ferma restando l'impossibilità di proporre dati statistici accurati, va considerato che si stima che gli ebrei uccisi nell'anno 1942 siano stati tra il 50 e il 55% di tutti quelli uccisi nella Shoah. Riguardo a questo e a altri dati quantitativi, non va dimenticato che essi sono sempre composti da singole persone, ciascuna caratterizzata da un nome, un'età, una famiglia, affetti, sogni, studi o attività. Le notizie arrivate in Santa Sede erano riferite da sacerdoti che rientravano da viaggi, da esponenti religiosi locali, nunzi apostolici, rappresentanti di governi, cittadini laici, singoli ebrei, enti ebraici. Dalla lettura di tutte queste carte emerge la lenta ma continua crescita dell'affiancamento dei vocaboli ebreo e morte, a partire da metà 1941. Mi sembra legittimo affermare che la Segreteria di Stato della Santa Sede fu uno dei maggiori punti di arrivo delle notizie dell'ebreicidio in atto nel continente. Qui di seguito ne ripropongo qualche esempio. In alcuni casi i documenti erano rimasti chiusi nei depositi archivistici vaticani sino all'apertura del 2020, in altri erano già stati pubblicati nei volumi pubblicati dalla Santa Sede dal 1965. Sono tante slot, tante cose che insieme configurano e sono in ordine cronologico. Il 13 novembre 1941 4 cattolici residenti a Trieste scrissero alla Segreteria di Stato per il tramite del vescovo di Trieste Antonio Santin chiedendo aiuto per far emigrare dal protettorato di Boemia e Moravia i loro genitori, minacciati di essere deportati in Polonia, poiché, virgolette, cito, per persone in avanzata età come quelle di cui qui si tratta, tale deportazione equivale alla morte a breve scadenza e dopo gravi sofferenze fisiche e morali. In una relazione per Pio XII, datata 6 gennaio 1942, il cappellano militare Pirro Scavizzi scrisse che gli ebrei polacchi, ma secondo me intendeva anche quelli ucraini, erano uccisi con vari sistemi, di cui il più frequente, il più conosciuto è quello del mitragliamento in massa, in gruppi di centinaia e centinaia e talvolta di migliaia. E aggiunse di avere saputo di gruppi di ebrei caricati su vagoni ferroviari poi abbandonati finché i poveri deportati erano quasi tutti morti. Aggiunse che il numero delle uccisioni di ebrei si fa scendere fino ad oggi a circa 1 milione. Gennaio 42. Il 18 marzo 42 i rappresentanti in Svizzera dell'Agenzia Ebraica per la Palestina e del Congresso Ebraico Mondiale consegnarono un promemoria al nunzio apostolico in Svizzera Filippo Bernardini, che il giorno seguente lo inoltrò al segretario di Stato Maglione. Il documento riepilogava la persecuzione antiebraica in atto nei territori sotto dominio tedesco e in alcuni stati europei antisemiti, indipendenti dalla Germania. Tra l'altro affermava che le legislazioni e le persecuzioni antiebraiche in corso in Croazia, Slovacchia e Romania forse miravano même à l'extermination physique des Juifs. Il francese era la lingua internazionale dell'epoca. Per la Polonia sotto occupazione nazista denunciava l'extermination lente et constante du fait du système de ghetto e l'uccisione diretta di migliaia di ebrei in Polonia e nelle parti della Russia occupate. In 2 occasioni il vocabolo extermination. Marzo 42. Il 12 maggio 1942, in una relazione per Pio XII, il cappellano militare Scavizzi scrisse: «La strage degli ebrei in Ucraina è ormai al completo. In Polonia e in Germania la si vuole portare ugualmente al completo, col sistema delle uccisioni di massa». In questo testo vi è anche una menzione di Auschwitz, ma quale luogo di incarceramento di alcuni salesiani. In una relazione del 13 maggio 1942, un altro cappellano militare, Silvio Negrato, riferì che secondo dichiarazioni tedesche da lui raccolte, la popolazione ebraica di Cracovia, Leopoli e altre città era in continua rapida diminuzione e specificò metodi per ridurre il loro numero, massacri in massa, deportazioni per destinazione sconosciuta. Taluno crede si tratti di massacri in altre località, poiché nessun deportato ha più dato notizie di sé. E prosegue. Ci sono queste notizie portate dai cappellani militari, perché erano quelle che viaggiavano nei treni ospedalieri che facevano la spola fra l'Italia e il Donbass, oggi noto per altre purtroppo ragioni, portando indietro i militari italiani che erano feriti al fronte. E qui aggiungo che queste informazioni arrivavano anche al governo fascista, non è solo la Santa Sede il ricettore. Luglio 42. L'ambasciatore della Polonia presso la Santa Sede, Kazimierz Papé, inoltrò alla Segreteria di Stato un rapporto del proprio Ministero delle Informazioni che riferiva di massacri incredibili degli ebrei in Polonia, stimava le vittime in 700.000 e anche lui menzionava il campo di concentramento di Auschwitz-Oswiecim, ma non mostrava ancora di conoscere la sua funzione di sterminio. Il 17 luglio 1942, pochi giorni dopo, lo stesso ambasciatore Papé inoltrò un altro rapporto governativo polacco sull'intera situazione. Riguardo agli ebrei affermava che la valutazione di 700.000 proveniva da milieu juif responsable e che i dati conosciuti dal governo polacco sembrano confermare quel totale. Vedete come la difficoltà di queste notizie di diventare notizie organizzate, tutte queste incertezze e rimandi sono perché stanno riferendo di qualcosa che è in corso e non c'era un bollettino ufficiale giornaliero delle azioni della Shoah. In questo testo, datato 12 luglio 42, consegnato il 17, precisava che alcuni erano tués dans des chambres de gaz, senza aggiungere dettagli. Per quelle che sono state le mie ricerche, lunghe ma assolutamente non complete, è la prima volta che è il testo più antico, diciamo, fra quelli giunti in Vaticano, nei quali vi è menzione della camera a gas. Però ovviamente è una ricerca veramente da fare, perché non sappiamo. E non è una cosa di poco conto, perché per chi la lesse doveva essere sconvolgente. Siamo noi che siamo abituati, io perlomeno parlo per me, sono io che sono abituato a parlarne e a sapere cosa significano. Ma nel luglio 1942 chi leggeva cosa aveva di pregresso nella testa? Il 10 settembre 1942 il padre cappuccino Callisto Lopinò scrisse da Feramonte in Calabria, may I have my glass of water please? Scrisse da Feramonte in Calabria al nunzio apostolico in Italia, thank you, Francesco Borgongini Duca, che gli ebrei stranieri internati nel campo di Ferramonti avevano ricevuto notizie sull'arresto e sulla deportazione dei propri familiari residenti nella Francia di Vichy e a loro volta temevano la propria deportazione e condanna a morte. Il 12 settembre 1942 gli ambasciatori presso la Santa Sede di Belgio e Polonia, c'erano tutti gli ambasciatori presenti, anche a nome dei colleghi rappresentanti della Francia, Lussemburgo, Norvegia, Olanda, Cecoslovacchia, Jugoslavia, presentarono alla Segreteria di Stato una richiesta collettiva di pronunciamento contro le politiche tedesche di occupazione che potevano aller jusqu'à l'extermination de certaines populations, e consegnarono uno stampato datato luglio 42. In questo stampato, nel capitolo sulla Polonia, era scritto che decine di migliaia di ebrei furono supprimés dans des chambres à gaz asphyxiantes e che nel settembre 41 più di 800 polacchi e prigionieri di guerra sovietici erano stati uccisi a Oswiecim au moyen de gaz asphyxiant. Il sostituto della Segreteria di Stato, Domenico Tardini, che ricevette i due ambasciatori, annotò in un proprio appunto datato 15 settembre 42 che questi due ambasciatori dandogli lo stampato, l'avevano voluto leggere gran parte con estenuante lentezza. Così si legge nel... Passano pochi giorni, il 18 settembre 42, l'altro sostituto della Segreteria di Stato, Giovanni Battista Montini, dopo un incontro con il dirigente dell'IRI, Giovanni Malvezzi, rientrato da un viaggio di lavoro a Varsavia, perché l'Italia aveva delle fabbriche in Polonia che il Terzo Reich non aveva espropriato in virtù dell'alleanza, Montini appuntò: i massacri sistematici degli ebrei hanno raggiunto proporzioni e forme esecrande e spaventose. Quando uno scrive proporzioni e forme, esecrande tante lo sono, ma spaventose, e poi le forme spaventose. Io, senza avere nessuna prova documentaria in mano, dentro di me sento che Monsignor Montini stava parlando delle camere a gas e che Malvezzi gli aveva parlato delle camere a gas. Sono molto onesto, mio dovere, non ho nessuna prova per dire questo. Il 7 novembre 42 il nunzio apostolico in Germania, Cesare Orsenigo, riferì al segretario di Stato Maglione le voci di una prossima deportazione degli ebrei facenti parte di famiglie semi-ariane. A me non interessano i vocaboli che usano per parlare in fretta, a me interessa il contenuto. Sta parlando dei misti e riferisce a Maglione dei tentativi di protesta suoi e dell'episcopato e aggiunge: qui però non si nutrono molte speranze che con le sole forze interne del paese si poter arginare almeno questa estrema misura. Quali sono? Cosa vuol dire le sole forze interne del paese? A me pare che questa frase costituisse una sommessa sollecitazione a un intervento della Santa Sede. Il 23 novembre 1942 il rabbino capo della Palestina, Ickx Herzog, rabbino capo Askenazita, qui già citato varie volte in questi giorni, scrisse al segretario di Stato Maglione che le notizie che gli pervenivano dalla Polonia erano le più orribili, in francese ma traduco all'impronta, le più orribili che si possa immaginare. Là-bas on fait des holocaustes systématiques, des milliers par jour, e che lui sperava che Sua Santità, il Papa, scusate la mia cattiva pronuncia anche del francese, farà tout le possible in ce moment-ci pour sauver nos malheureux frères in Pologne. Infine, per quello che riguarda questa mia veloce passare in rassegna, infine il 14 dicembre 1942, come è noto agli studiosi italiani e forse anche a qualche straniero, un gesuita tedesco scrisse una lettera al segretario di Pio XII in cui confermava un precedente rapporto che al momento non è stato rintracciato e che sembra che solo qualche bravo studioso tedesco possa riuscire a trovare in qualche angolo degli archivi della Germania, non perché gli studiosi e gli archivisti italiani non siano abili, ma perché non l'hanno trovato, non è dove dovrebbe essere. Il 14 dicembre confermava un precedente rapporto sul fatto che a Rawa Ruska, città più o meno fra l'Ucraina e la Polonia, vi era un altoforno scritto Hochhofen, perché la lettera è in tedesco. Hochhofen, altoforno, è caratterizzato da una ciminiera e da una temperatura alta e costante. Un Hochhofen delle SS in cui venivano uccise fino a 6.000 persone al giorno. In questa lettera il gesuita confermava anche le informazioni su Auschwitz contenute nel precedente rapporto e noi non sappiamo quali erano. Però evidentemente erano informazioni gravi se sentiva il bisogno di confermarle, ma non sappiamo cosa c'era scritto. Infine collegava tutto ciò alle recenti parole di Hitler in un discorso del 30 settembre 1942 sullo sterminio di interi popoli e che richiamava la sua profezia nota, cosiddetta profezia nota a tutti gli studiosi. Considerando che Rava Ruska era scritto fra virgolette, a differenza delle altre località menzionate in questa lettera, e considerando che a Rava Ruska non c'era un centro di sterminio di massa, ma che a circa 20 chilometri da lì c'era il campo di sterminio, il centro di sterminio di Belzec, pare molto probabile che il mittente si riferisse a quel centro di sterminio. Va anche detto, però, che lì, a Belzec, non venivano adoperati forni crematori per le povere vittime, come ad Auschwitz, bensì venivano frettolosamente sepolti per terra. E questo, secondo me, è un indizio di come circolavano le informazioni clandestine, che sono spesso imprecise nei particolari e intrecciano notizie di provenienza diversa, ma certa, e poi viaggiano e magari sono anche un pochino deformate passando di bocca in bocca. Non è l'ANSA, la Reuters, l'Associated Press. Siamo in un territorio nel quale da Rava Ruska queste notizie arrivano a München e viaggiano per centinaia di chilometri. Io non so come, spero che qualcuno riesca a ricostruirlo. Però c'è l'altoforno delle SS, che è un'immagine agghiacciante. Un altoforno delle SS con 6.000 vittime al giorno. Qui finisce il breve elenco. A fronte delle tante notizie sulle uccisioni di ebrei giunte nel corso del 1942, il primo accenno alle vittime fatto in modo pubblico dalla Santa Sede in quell'anno fu quello, per quanto io ho potuto vedere, contenuto nel discorso pronunciato da Pio XII alla radio il 24 dicembre 1942. Si trattò di una frase di pochi vocaboli, collocata alla fine di un testo che oggi quantificheremmo in 35.000 battute, centrato su altri temi. La frase era situata al quarto punto di un elenco delle varie categorie di vittime della guerra e concerneva le centinaia di migliaia di persone che erano uccise o duramente perseguitate senza avere una colpa propria, talora solo per ragione di nazionalità o di stirpe. C'è un talora dentro questa frase. La categoria quindi racchiudeva tutte le vittime prive di qualsiasi colpa, giusta o sbagliata che fosse, accettabile o non accettabile, compresi i polacchi in genere e gli ebrei, ma questo riferimento era chiaro solo agli ascoltatori avveduti. Cioè qui non interessa poco sapere, a me, per come io lavoro, sapere quali ambasciatori hanno commentato in un senso o nell'altro. Per capire se questo messaggio è arrivato o non è arrivato, interessa sapere le reazioni raccolte nella popolazione, fra la gente, fra gli ascoltatori comuni. La formulazione adottata non costituì un atto di solidarietà esplicita, non pose pubblicamente i capi nazisti di fronte alle proprie responsabilità, non invitò gli alleati a difendere gli ebrei, non ordinò ai cattolici di proteggerli dovunque e comunque. Forse non doveva farlo, che è un altro discorso. Primo discorso, quello che mi interessa è cosa ha fatto. Quel discorso non è stato queste cose. E queste parole sembrano quindi essere state l'unico risultato pubblico ottenuto dalle notizie e dagli appelli accumulatisi nel corso di quell'anno. È per questo che ieri nel dibattito dicevo che a mio modesto modo di vedere il tema di indagine non sono il silenzio / il suono, ma le parole dette, le parole non dette e quali parole sono state dette quando sono state dette. Le notizie pervenute alla Santa Sede nel 1942 furono centinaia. I pochi esempi che ho presentato in questa sede, sto concludendo, menzionano l'individuazione delle vittime tramite criteri razzisti, il legame tra deportazione e morte, la pratica delle uccisioni di massa, il ricorrere del termine sterminio, la contabilizzazione delle vittime in milioni, l'esistenza di locali chiusi in cui le persone morivano asfissiate dal gas, l'utilizzo di definizioni quali incredibile o il più orribile che si possa immaginare. Nel loro insieme, a mio parere di storico contemporaneo, descrivevano abbastanza bene ciò che oggi denominiamo Shoah. Grazie per l'attenzione.
So our third speaker today is Dr. Johan Ickx, who will be speaking about the role of diplomats as seen in the Ebrei files. Dr. Ickx studied religion, theology, and philosophy at the Catholic University of Leuven and earned his doctorate in church history at the Pontifical Gregorian University. He worked as academic assistant at the journal Archivum Historiae Pontificae, as an official of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, and as archivist of the Tribunal of Apostolic Penitentiary. For a decade, he served as an official consultant to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. He's the author of a study of the Holy See's assessment of Germany's tactics in occupied Belgium during the First World War, in which he argued that Eugenio Pacelli, the then Vatican's equivalent of a foreign minister, played a key role in bringing the Vatican to recognize that Germany was trying to terrorize the population of Belgium. Dr. Ickx is currently the Director of Historical Archives in the Holy See's section of Relations with States, where he has had special access to these archives for the past 10 years and has collected hundreds of documents pertaining to the Vatican and the persecution of the Jewish community for his 2020 book on Pius XII, on the Jews of Pius XII. Thank you, Dr. Ickx.
Thank you for this introduction. I have been asked to speak on the role of papal diplomats as it emerges from the Ebrei files. The subject would be too vast and would require years of research, in my opinion. And let us hope that someone one day will decide to analyze all the material present in these Ebrei files of the historical archives and in the other archives, and I tell you something about that later on. This does not mean, however, that even now I have arrived to some conclusions and new insights regarding the activity of Pius XII on behalf of Jews, whether baptized or not. In my earlier publication, published in 2018, I was still of the mistaken idea that help was sought only for converted Jews and not for Jews tout court. And I tried in that time to provide an explanation for this attitude of the Holy See. And I recall shortly, I said then that, you know, a shepherd's first concern should be his flock. And so it's understandable, quite logically, that bishops and cardinals and the Pope sought in first place to defend Christian Jews. Secondly, the so-called Christian Jews, baptized Jews, could not count on help from Jewish relief organizations. And for this reason, they were vulnerable. Certainly, some further explanation may also be called for. But Thirdly, the whole debate on racism, provoked by German and Italian racist laws in that time, but much more by the events of the Kristallnacht in Germany, caused an unprecedented reaction by the Catholic hierarchy in Europe. We know of the interventions of Cardinal Schuster, Cardinal Van Rooij, Cardinal Guerrigera, just after the Kristallnacht. So it was anyway present in the Catholic hierarchy to react to this. The limits set to, and then fourthly, the limits set by those racial laws left no room for assisting anyone of Jewish birth. And I want to stress on this. This remains valuable for the whole World War II. And Orsenigo is the first one to write it clearly to his superiors in Rome, that you cannot even look to a Jew who is beaten on the street. If not, they take you also to prison. That was the atmosphere in Berlin. So there was in the streets of Europe something going on that was never seen, that was never lived. And I saw also there a reason why people were afraid, really afraid, to do something for Jews. The Jews themselves say it also among them. In the context of the Concordat, and that is the last point that I said in that time, in the context of the Concordat with Germany, the Church, in its official actions and speech, could only reach out to those who were baptized. Otherwise, those words and actions could be considered as interference in state matters of Germany. And in this respect, the notion of Christian Jews was a necessary invention even by the Secretary of State, not just a linguistic trope, to create the juridical space in which one could help as many people as possible. Now, when in 2020, Pope Francis opened the archives to researchers, all this changed. Radically. We need only to read one case, that of Dr. Bershatsky from the year 38-39, just before the war. And thus, still during the pontificate of Pius XI, and Cardinal Pacelli as a Secretary of State. The Romanian woman, Bershatsky, who had received a medical degree in Italy, she wrote, and I quote, "Non sapendo come risolvere la mia disperata situazione, oso rivolgere viva preghiera alla santità vostra, tanto benefico verso i poveri ebrei, affinché per via diplomatica si degni di intervenire per farci ottenere la sanatoria ai mancati pagamenti per le tasse annuali richieste dal Regio Consolato Romeno di Roma, per tenere aggiornati i nostri passaporti, ed anche l'autorizzazione dal Ministero Interno rumeno per il nulla osta al nostro ritorno in patria." We learn that the matter was pursued by diplomatic channels through the ecclesiastical counselor of the Romanian legation to the Holy See in Rome. Following a fruitless intervention, a second request came in, and this time recommended by Professor Arrigo Piperno, surely a Jew, whom Bershatsky asked to voler interporre i suoi buoni uffici, it's always to the Pope, presso il ministro di Romania in Roma, nonché presso il nunzio apostolico in Bucharest. Monsignor Casullo was informed at that moment and immediately pursued the case in Bucharest. Around March 39, the nuncio Casullo was able to inform the Secretary of State, I quote, "Fin dal giorno 21 gennaio scorso ho presentato personalmente al Ministero degli Esteri una raccomandazione speciale in vista delle vive istanze fatte dal Vaticano per le due rumene Dvoira e Fanny Berchatsky. It's the medical doctor and her mother. Fin da allora ho potuto comprendere che il governo, in vista dell'altissima intervenzione, venuto dalla Santa Sede, avrebbe accolto la supplica pur dichiarando che il momento politico presentava, in fatti di tale natura, gravi difficoltà. Ora ricevo la risposta che vedo con piacere, affermativa, e che già mi è stato comunicato per telefono. This case tells us much about the procedures, the administrative methods, and the number of actors involved by actions in favor of Jews made by the Secretary of State. Indeed, the following persons were involved in this case: Minutante of the Secretary of State, the superiors of the Secretary of State, the Cardinal Secretary of State himself, the ecclesiastical counselor of the Romanian legation, the diplomat in charge on the embassy, a certain Professor Piperno, the nuncio in Bucharest, the ministry in Romania at the highest level. The case also tells us much about the trust that Jews, and in this case an unbaptized Jewish woman, placed in the Pope. Here both Pius XI and later Pius XII, because the case was not resolved before he became Pope. And how, at least in this case, the Holy See was sometimes able to achieve a satisfactory result. And this was probably one of the cases that inspired, maybe, the statement of Pius XII in the consistory of December 1940, and in his address to the College of Cardinals, also broadcasted by Vatican Radio, the Pope stated, "Of no little comfort is it to us to have been able to console with the moral and the spiritual assistance of our representatives and with the contribution of our subventions, huge number of refugees, expatriates, emigrants, also among those of Semitic Jewish lineage." The radical change of my point of view to all this also regarded the meaning of the Ebrei files themselves. From a thorough reading of the files, there emerged a new and previously, for me, unthinkable reality. Reading all the cases and combining them with other archival material present in the bilateral files, one can observe a structure that had previously been present only on the surface, but had remained hidden, invisible, obscured, and often made inaccessible by erroneous or distorted preconceptions, like my own in the past. Assistance to Jews was provided place through a number of channels, some of them acting in complete secrecy, as in catacombs. I'm sorry, but there was no other way in that time. And others acting through the official channels on different geographical levels. Each of them had its specific structures and activities. The first channel can be situated on the level of the city of Rome. At the head of this group was Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, a former diplomat of the Secretary of State, who just prior to the war was attached to the congregation of the Holy Office, of course, to mask his being a diplomat, and had a permanent residence in the Campo Santo Teutonico of Germans and Flemings in the Vatican. He could count on several collaborators spread throughout the area of Rome, whose true identities we still do not know at all. Father Musters, a Dutchman, arrested by the SS in Santa Maria Maggiore, and Father Pancratius Pfeiffer are well known until now and were two of his collaborators. It will be difficult to reconstruct the organization of what we call the escape line, considering that there is no real testament written ever, except for testimonies of some collaborators, In the Ebrei files, the Palatine Fathers occasionally appear, as we know. They had a center for hiding baptized and unbaptized Jews coming into Rome to be transferred elsewhere. A central role in the escape line was that of the convents and other religious buildings. In addition, there was a remarkable choice to count on the private services of a go-between with the Italian ministry in the person of Jesuit Father Pietro Tacchiventuri, rather than using the official channel of the nunciature in Italy. It's remarkable. The second channel can be situated on the Italian soil, the Italian geographical soil. First, the dioceses and religious orders spread all over the country, and the new material in the archives of the Vatican show that the archbishops of Milan, Torino, Genova, Florence, Assisi, Verona, Salerno were very active in assisting Jews, and not only in camps that were nearby. If we take only Cardinal Boeto, the Archbishop of Genova, Jesuit, as an example, we can easily see that what I said earlier about distortion in interpreting their role during the war. In the past, he was recognized as being well disposed toward the Jews, but his efforts were seen as an individual and local choice. Now, we know that these efforts were by instruction and upon request of the Secretary of State, which also granted him facultà specialissime, most special faculties, during the war. Now, one interesting case is also, and it's well known by every one of you, Assisi, where were found 300 Jews. No one is asking himself, how came these 300 Jews in Assisi? Assisi doesn't have 300 Jews as a community. So, in a publication of the Franciscan Fathers after the war, right after the war, and involved in this rescue operation in Assisi, we read that questa fervida attività implicava una vasta organizzazione di cui il vescovo di Assisi era l'anima. In other words, the local bishop together with the Franciscan Fathers, while the discreet initiative of the Secretary of State at the beginning of the paragraph is also stated. With Assisi, we naturally come to Florence, and the Italian champion bicyclist Bartali, of who you know, did courses. Well, he was running between Assisi and Florence, bringing documents from one side to the other. And he was not the only one. The lifelong friendship between Cardinal Schuster and Don Calabrio of Verona should be re-examined in the light of their work for rescuing Jews. A regular rescue and communication network for saving Jews seems to have existed between Genova, Milan, and Torino. But still, everything has to be studied. The rescue network relied also on family ties in Italy. One such case is that of the Palatucci family. The uncle, Bishop Giuseppe Maria Palatucci, was regularly in contact with Giovanni Palatucci, the regent of the Questura of Fiume, who died in Dachau. The question is no longer whether there were connections. The question is now, who was the architect behind all this? The third channel was assistant on the European level. The Ebrei files and other material help us to detect rescue channels active throughout the European continent. In some cases, we have already detected offices, for instance, those of Cardinal de Jong in Utrecht, or that of Cardinal Stepinac in Zagreb, functioning outside of the diocesan curia and dealing exclusively with assistance to Jews. In other cases, private persons were charged by the Secretary of State, as for instance in southern France, the Capuchin Father de Bourguiret. Their actions were coordinated at the European level. Otherwise, it would not be possible to explain the positive outcome of the saving of French Jewish children coming in to the Holy Land all of a sudden. Where do they come from? How did they manage to get through all these countries? It was on this level that the nuncios played a very important role. After the decision of the Nazi regime to embark upon the final solution, mass deportations of Jews became also a very, very quick scenario on the European continent. These deportations came in the wake of the mass immigration of the previous years. At this point, that the Holy See's policies of rescuing, protecting Jews became even more intense, but also more fraught with danger. The appointment of individuals with no diplomatic training or experience, but who were well known for their activities aimed for saving Jews, could help to explain the selection policy of the Holy See for regions like, for instance, Yugoslavia. The choice by Pacelli and Maglione of Abbot Marcone as the Holy See's representative for Yugoslavia is in this respect most interesting. And, of course, Burzio, Rota, Verolino, Casullo, Roncalli, Valeri, Bernardini, and I can go on with naming them all, are constantly working to save them, not to not save them, and that is important. A nuncio could also say, I cannot do anything, it is impossible, I don't do it, it's too dangerous, hiding, behind the wall, to not doing. Instead, they all are active. They all try to do what they can to get people out or get people in, because it's both sides. And that is remarkable. All these were inclined to save as many Jews as they could. And they did so fearlessly in the face of the Nazi and the fascist terror. Sharing this strong conviction, they represented discrete but highly efficient pivotal points in the European network. Now, the fourth channel was the assistant on the global level. And I should show, in fact, a map of the globe now to point where these people then were, brought to. It would end up, of course, in South America, in America, but also in China, Shanghai. Now, conclusion. The opening of the Ebrei files as a series, already an exceptional case in the archival history of the Secretary of State itself, is a very fascinating and important event, since it shows that there was an office, and we know in the meanwhile that there was not one office, but two offices working, one under Tardini and one under Montini, and the other had 15,000 requests to the Pope, so much more than we have in our historical archive. Now, there was an office that took care of Jews, and not just single Jews, but individuals, families, and groups of people who addressed the Holy Father directly from all over Europe, requests for help. Before 2020, this was something unknown to all of us, and upon further investigation, I was able to conclude that these Jews were convinced, and they write this themselves in their letters, that Pius XII was the last shore available to save our system. The fact that they say this and the fact that they write this means that they perceive this to be true. Another fact about this series is what I call, and what I called the Pacelli list ones, because 2,800 people are not, or names are not little, were who were somehow helped or not, because sometimes the help was fruitless. Another 15,000 letters, as I say, are to find on the other side, at the Apostolic Archives. Now, 17,800 letters in less than 6-7 years makes quite an average a day. The Office for Jews at the Congregation, a second conclusion, the Office for Jews at the Congregation for Extraordinary Ecclesiastical Affairs was run day and night by Monsignor Dell'Acqua. We heard him. Now, I have a problem. Can he really be called an anti-Semite? A man who is 24 hours a day busy doing all what he can to manage the saving of Jews all over Europe, in the world. It's a problem. I hear it every time again. He was an anti-Semite, he's an anti-Semite. Now, I don't know. Let's find it out. Let's make roughly studies on the person, but in my opinion, he wasn't. Now, the Office for the Jews was, and that's the third conclusion, as far as I know, and I don't know, no other government in Europe or out of Europe ever, at its own expenses and in such a massive manner, had an office for practical rescue on the field. To be able to respond, that's another question, to the letters of the field called for an almost perfectly functioning worldwide network, the individuals involved, also on the grassroots level, were stably appointed to this work, beginning with Flaherty and the nuncios. They all received instructions and guidelines from the Secretary of State. Now, many of the nuncios, and that was where I should have spoken about, but I did a little bit, many of those nuncios are recognized by Yad Vashem as just among the nations. They acted, however, never on their own initiative, but on instruction from and at the command of Pope Pius XII. And that's for sure, because it is written. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker today is Monika Stolarczyk-Bilardie from the Catholic University of Leuven. She holds a master's in German philology from the University of Warsaw, Dutch philology also from the University of Warsaw, and history from the NIOD University of Amsterdam. She is currently affiliated with Leuven as the Flanders PhD Fellow, and her research focuses on the attitudes of the Polish Catholic Church and the Vatican toward the Holocaust. Her first research results of this project have been presented at various international conferences in 2022 and 2023. The article entitled "The Vatican and the Holocaust: Inside Information from Poland, 1939 to 1942" will be published this fall in the Revue d'Histoire de la Shoah. Today, she will be speaking on Polish Catholic bishops and the Holocaust. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me. As we heard, in countries where papal diplomats were present during the World War II, they were regularly informing the Vatican about the anti-Semitic laws, persecutions, and deportation of Jews. Also were in many cases intervening on their behalf by local authorities. But what about occupied Poland, which unwillingly became the scenery of the Holocaust? With the outbreak of the war, the two most important sources of information and Vatican's influence in the country, Nuncio Cortesi and Primat Chlon, had left the country. The situation forced the Vatican and the remaining Polish bishops to look for alternative communication channels. As a result, the most important communication between them happened through trusted intermediaries, people who carried documents, letters, and verbal messages. In many cases, those intermediaries wrote extensive reports about their conversations and impressions in German-occupied Poland. As we know, the most important direct written communication between Polish bishops and the Vatican was already available for many years thanks to the publication of Actes and Documents, allowing for the surprising preliminary conclusion that the Polish bishops did not pass to the Vatican any information about the ongoing Holocaust in Poland. However, the broader context of that communication and the reports by the intermediaries who often talked with the Polish bishops remained for the most part hidden until the opening of the archives in 2020. In this paper, I will analyze what new insights about the attitude the Polish bishops took regarding the Holocaust can be found in those newly available documents, and in which direction those new insights suggest the further research should go. I will focus here on 4 Polish bishops who corresponded the most with the Holy See: Adam Sapiecha from Kraków, Stanisław Gall and his successor Antoni Szlagowski from Warsaw, and Stanisław Adamski from Katowice. I will focus here mostly on the years 41-43, the most important years in this context. Let me share with you some numbers reflecting the immensity and intensity of the communication between these 4 Polish bishops and the Vatican. The numbers consist of all written and oral communication. The last graph presents the division of the communication between formal written and informal oral. The graphs immediately show that the communication between those bishops and the Vatican was immense despite of the circumstances. It is important to notice here the amount of outgoing communications in the first 4 years of the war for the 4 bishops. It amounts to a minimum of 150 outgoing letters and messages. The analysis of this communication allows for a conclusion that regardless the terrible church persecution in occupied Poland, the censorship, the danger, the bishops succeeded in passing important information about the church and the occupied country to the Holy See. Let me very shortly introduce those 4 bishops to you. Stanisław Gall, already 74 years old at the beginning of the war, grazie. At the beginning of the war was apostolic administrator of Warsaw. The main subject of his communication to the Holy See were his interventions on behalf of arrested priests, church persecution, and practical church business. The perception of Gall is rather negative in the literature. The authors and also other people who talked to him in that time underlined his passivity, lack of guiding authority, timidity, and fear of Germans. After his death in September 42, the Cathedral chapter chose Bishop Szlagowski to succeed him. Szlagowski was 78 years old at that moment, and he remained passive until the end of the war. Adamski, born in 1875, was Bishop of Katowice. He was expelled from his diocese in February 41 and transferred to Warsaw, where he lived for the remaining war years. Adamski managed to be very well informed about the situation in all Polish dioceses and shared that knowledge frequently with the Vatican. In fact, given Bishop Gall's fearful attitude and later sickness and death, as well as the advanced age and limitation of his successor Szlagowski, Adamski was the most important informing bishop of the Vatican in Warsaw. Adamski was the one who provided the most information, but Sapiecha was for sure the most respected bishop, both in Poland and in the Vatican. Although Sapiecha was already in his late 70s, he became de facto the head of the Polish Catholic Church and the country itself during the war. The numbers clearly show that Sapiecha was the bishop who corresponded the most with the Vatican. The topics of that communication varied from the most basic church businesses. Okay. Doing my best. Yeah. Sapiecha's communication varied from the most basic church business like faculties to appeals to the Pope for protest on behalf of the suffering Polish population and the Polish Church. Sapiecha's situation in the years 41-43 was very difficult. Some of his closest collaborators were arrested and put in the concentration camps. But I also analyzed his communication and in his direct correspondence with the Holy See between 41 and 43, there is not a word about the persecution of murder or Jews. The only focus was a possible protest on behalf of Poles and the Polish Church. Jews, as can be concluded from these letters, were not seen as Poles by neither Sapiecha nor the Vatican. Let me now present some new documents which offer additional insights about the attitude the Polish Catholic Church and Polish bishops took towards the ongoing Holocaust. First document concerns Sapiecha. The increased terror against him in 1942 coincided with the start of the Aktion Reinhardt in Poland. From this period comes the only testimony about Sapieha talking about the liquidations of Jews. The report, written by military chaplain Silvio Negrato, already mentioned here, who many times visited Sapieha in his palace, offers extensive information about Archbishop's situation and detailed descriptions of ghetto liquidations and mass executions in the East, as we've heard. Immediately after these terrible descriptions of massacres, followed information about Jews and Sapieha. There is no shortage of acts of sabotage carried out by Jews, who are often discovered as part of communist cells. In Dniepropetrovsk, they try to poison some wells and undermine a bridge. The Archbishop of Krakow is convinced of the ineffectiveness of the struggle waged with these systems. The colonels commanding the squads of Vienna and Lviv are of the same opinion. However, no one denies the serious faults of the Jews to the detriment of Poland and the Church. Their present set conditions is but the application of the law of the retaliation, la legge del taglione. This last remark of Negrato suggests that also Sapieha shared the opinion that Jews had close ties to communism, that their actions had a negative impact on Poland, and, as a result, that they were in a way to blame for what was happening to them. The kind of source does not allow to verify if these opinions really came out of Sapieha's mouth, but there are arguments in favor of such a possibility. First, these views coincided with Sapieha's opinions about Jews expressed by him before the war on several occasions. Second, the analysis of the reports by the military chaplains, who frequently talked to Sapieha in 1942, shows that Sapieha trusted them, that he was passing through them sensitive information to the Vatican, which could easily have led to Sapieha's arrest and increased persecution of the Church in Poland, and that Sapieha certainly did not avoid sensitive topics in the conversations with the military chaplains. Considering these arguments, the report by Negrato seems to be a credible source of information about Sapieha. In September 1942, when Aktion Reinhardt was some months on the way, and the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto has reached the highest numbers, one of the intermediaries, also already mentioned, Giovanni Malvezzi, the director of IRI, came back from Poland. As already identified by previous research, Malvezzi was by far the most important intermediary between Polish bishops and the Vatican. He frequently presented to the Secretariat of State extensive and detailed reports about the religious, political, economic, and social situation in Poland, including detailed descriptions of the situation of Jews. Already in 1941, Malvezzi informed that he had access to the ghetto of Warsaw and reported in detail about the tragic situation there. He noticed then also the rise of Polish anti-Semitism as a reaction to the alleged collaboration of Jews in the oppression of Poles under Soviet rule. Back to September 1942. So Malvezzi reported to Montini, we already heard that from Professor Sarfatti, about the daily liquidations of entire ghettos in systematic massacres of the Jews. However, during this trip, after this trip, Malvezzi also brought a document to the Vatican, a very famous leaflet entitled Protest, written by the Polish Catholic activist Zofia Kossak-Szczucka in August 1942. The pencil note on the document itself indicates that it was Bishop Adamski who gave Malvezzi the pamphlet to be transmitted to the Vatican. The document itself is very well known in the literature. We did not know until now that it reached the Vatican so soon after it was written, and that it was Bishop Adamski who wanted the Vatican to know about it. Another military chaplain remains anonymous, but according to his report from December 1942, he visited Sapieha many times over a period of several months in 1942. In that report, this military chaplain gave a quite detailed descriptions given to him by Sapieha of Auschwitz as a camp for Polish priests. He, Sapieha, talked about Polish priests. Many of them find themselves interned in Auschwitz, where 40,000 are living concentrated, if life can be called theirs. A large city of barracks, all fenced off with barbed wire. Every 200 meters and above there is a sentry box where soldiers armed with machine guns stand guard. At night, the huge prison camp is lit up by huge reflectors. Interned Polish priests can be counted by the thousands, only crime being Polish. No exceptions were made due to poor health or advanced age. This report, together with some already longer-known letters from Sapieha, in which he also mentions often the concentration camps as camps for Poles, and information from other people, confirms that in the eyes of Poles at that moment, Auschwitz was only a camp for Polish prisoners. It also further substantiates the claim that it was certainly possible to pass in a secret way any desirable information to the Vatican. After one of his next trips, in March 43, Malvezzi informed the Pope about the Jews hiding on the so-called Aryan side of Warsaw and confirmed once again that he visited the ghetto of Warsaw. He also recalled about the letter Sapieha sent to Governor Hans Frank on November 2nd, 42. Malvezzi wrote, "The attitude taken last November by Archbishop Sapieha had enormous repercussions throughout Poland. Archbishop Sapieha addressed a letter to the Governor-General Frank himself. In this letter, the main grievances of Poland against the German government were summarized, including the maltreatment of the Jews. Malvezzi suggested that, in that letter to Frank, Sapieha protested against the maltreatment of Jews. However, Sapieha actually protested in that letter, which, by the way, the Vatican had at its possession at that moment, against the use of intoxicated Polish youth employed in Baudienste in liquidations of Jews. The exact words of Sapieha were, I quote, "I don't want to dwell any longer on such horrific excesses as the use of young Baudienste workers who had been intoxicated with alcohol for the purpose of the liquidation of Jews. The protests clearly concerned Polish young men, not Jews, as suggested by Malvezzi." On the occasion of Malvezzi's next trip to Poland in June 43, the Vatican transmitted through him some recent papal speeches to the Polish episcopacy, including the one from June 2nd, 43 to the College of Cardinals, in which the Pope addressed the situation in Poland and the murder of Jews. The report Malvezzi presented on his return mentioned, next to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and other details about the Holocaust, the Polish attitude in face of the tragedy of Jews. I quote, "We think it's necessary to point out that on the Polish side, in principle, apart from natural human commiseration, there is a sort of tacit satisfaction with the work of the destruction of the Jews, as well as with the solution of a pressing national problem. So much so that from the recent speech of the Pope, the various bishops thought it inappropriate to emphasize the part referring to the Jews, and only the Ruthenian Metropolitan protested in one of his mandates against the Jewish massacres. The Pope's word for Poland made a great impression of joy on all the bishops to whom it was brought, Bishop Adamski in Warsaw, Bishop Twardowski in Lwów, and Archbishop Sapieha in Kraków. And everything has been done so that it has the greatest diffusion." In other words, the bishops were very pleased with the papal speech, and they would take care of its large diffusion, but some of them seem to have omitted the section regarding the extermination of Jews, as not to antagonize the regular believers. Malvezzi's report indicates that even in the face of an almost total annihilation of Polish Jewry, we speak about June 43, when the ghetto liquidations were already finished, the ghetto uprising had failed, the hunt for individual Jews was on its highest, there was still a large section of Polish society that had held deep-rooted pre-war anti-Semitic views. According to Malvezzi, Poles were even satisfied with the work of Germans. The text suggests that at least some Polish bishops were aware of these feelings and possibly shared them. During the same trip, Malvezzi visited the city of Lwów. I quote, "The last weeks," I forgot to put this one on the slide, so I will read it slowly. "The last weeks of May have been marked by the definitive persecution of the Jews, with the destruction of the Lwów ghetto and the ghettos in the minor cities of Galicia. Monsignor Szeptycki has published an instruction in that regard, which the German censorship has changed significantly. On the Roman Catholic side, there was no thought of making any demonstration against the persecution of Jews." With this small remark, Malvezzi summarized not only the ecclesiastical situation of Lwów, but also of entire occupied Poland. The only clear protest against the annihilation of Jews from a bishop living on these territories when the Holocaust took place did not come from a Roman Catholic bishop, nor from a Polish bishop, but from the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Archbishop Szeptycki. He was also the only hierarch on those territories who expressis verbis and from his own initiative, at least 2 times, informed the Pope about the mass murder of Jews. The only time the Vatican needed concrete information about the fate of some Jews from Warsaw and from Łódź, the family Friedman, the request for information was sent secretly to Adamski, the Bishop of Katowice, who in return informed the Vatican about the ghetto uprising and the Jews hiding on the Aryan side. This morning, I quote, Mrs. Gagliardini, coming from Warsaw, said on behalf of Bishop Adamski that unfortunately there is no news. Since last May, the Warsaw ghetto no longer exists. 800 houses were burned down. The Jews either perished or were deported elsewhere, or if free, they live under other names. Impossible to trace them. The conclusion. The documents discussed here allow to conclude that it was possible to pass sensitive information from the occupied Poland to the Vatican. Polish bishops investigated here made frequently use of this possibility and transmitted letters and verbal messages to the Pope. All the more surprising is the almost complete lack in this correspondence of information about the ongoing annihilation of Jews. It cannot be explained with the fear of Germans, as other information about the persecution of Church and Poles equally sensitive was successfully transmitted to the Holy See. In the years 41-43, the only Polish bishop who transmitted information to the Vatican about the murder of Jews was Stanisław Adamski. In September 42, he sent a highly informative protest leaflet, and in July 43, after having been asked directly by the Vatican to find out news about Jews, reported back about the failure of the ghetto uprising and Jews hiding on the Aryan side. When the argument of impossibility to communicate can no longer hold, other possible reasons for the silence from the majority of the Polish bishops need to be considered. Manfred Klaus, in his study about the Vatican's relations with Poland, defined 3 main problems of Polish Catholicism during the war: the administration of the dioceses, the care of souls by priests, and the lack of new generations of priests. The documents discussed here suggest that one more should at least be considered, in hindsight of course, in the further research: the problem of anti-Semitism in the Polish Catholic Church and among some Polish bishops. The sources about the bishops' attitude regarding the Jews and the Holocaust are scarce. That is why the reports of the intermediaries who frequently talked to them and who were trusted by both the bishops and the Vatican are invaluable. Malvezzi noted the rise of anti-Semitism among the Poles already in the summer of 41. In 42, when the Holocaust reached the core of the Polish territory, the myth of Jews being communists, some other examples I wasn't able to show you, was still very much present. The very well-documented pre-war anti-Semitic opinions preached by the Polish Catholic Church were, as it seems, very much at place also in the midst of the Holocaust. The opinion expressed by the representative of the Polish Catholic Church, probably including Sapiecha, and transmitted by Negrato, is to say the least shocking given its timing. Sapiecha suggested that Jews were acting to the detriment of Poland, and their present set condition was but an application of the law of the retaliation, la legge del taglione, eye for an eye. The existence of the problem of anti-Semitism was once again confirmed in June 43, when Malvezzi, who brought the papal speech from June 2nd, 43, noticed the tacit satisfaction with the destruction of Jews among the mainly Roman Catholic people he talked to, just a few weeks after the failure of ghetto uprising. Some of his interlocutors saw Jews as a persistent national problem. This anti-Semitic attitude of the large masses caused the Polish bishops to consider omission of the fragment when the Pope spoke about the destruction of Jews when diffusing that papal speech in Poland. The problem of anti-Semitism in the Polish Catholic Church is a topic for further research, especially in the Polish local archives. It is important to notice here that it was for sure seen as a problem by some of the intermediaries, but it was never recognized as such, neither by the Catholic Church in Poland, nor by the Vatican at that time. Although definitely present in the attitude of some bishops during the war, anti-Semitism cannot be seen as the only reason for the silence. Other explanations to consider would be the indifference to the fate of Jews, and probably parallel to that, the precedence of the own suffering of the Polish Church, which was persecuted, and of Poles, to that of Jews. In this constellation, the parallel tragedy of Jewish people, who were not considered fellow Poles, as clearly shown in the letters of Sapieha, was not important enough to be brought up and would take the attention away from the persecutions of the Church and the Poles. It could explain a lack of clear protest from the side of the Polish bishops against the atrocities of Jews, of a clear call for people not to participate in any way in those atrocities, and of a clear appeal for helping Jews, all of which the Lviv Greek Catholic Metropolitan Szeptycki did in 42 and 43, when confronted with the mass murder of Jews, the anti-Semitism of his own people, and their voluntary involvement in the atrocities. Last but not least, the absence of the subject could have something to do with the pattern of expectations in the Vatican itself. Also in the Holy See, the knowledge about the murder of Jews, brought in detail by Malvezzi, Adamski, Szeptycki, and several military chaplains, as we heard, was for a long time ignored and not followed upon. Regarding the situation in Poland, the Vatican was more interested in the administration of the dioceses and in counteracting the Nazis' anti-papal propaganda and persecution of the Church. Those were the subjects the Vatican expected the Polish bishop to inform about. The tragedy of the Jews was at most a secondary issue, often categorized as a political one. Following that logic, the lack of information from the part of the Polish bishops was in concordance with Vatican's expectations. It can also explain why Adamski, when asked about concrete information about Jews, voluntarily provided the requested information, following the logic of supply and demand. As we have seen, not many bishops on those territories had the courage to break that logic and inform the Pope anyway of what was happening in Poland. Thank you for your attention.